10 years after Ben's death, in 1959, I met Martin Luther King. He had just finished an address to the faculty of Miami University of Ohio. A graduate teaching assistant, I was technically faculty and allowed in. The leader of the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott and the awakening civil rights movement of the Deep South, he was a figure of interest, nationally known, but not yet of transcendent importance. Selma, the March on Washington, I Have a Dream, the Memphis balcony, all lay before him. The meeting was well attended, 50 or so liberal professors, all white. I felt he was speaking cautiously to his audience, a little stiff, not in his element, alert not to offend. He was seeking support, funds, on a speaking tour, some behind him, more to go, maybe a bit tired. None of this subtracted from the feeling that you were in the presence of an impressive man. He had that ability to resonate emotionally with an audience, chest to chest, to make each individual feel he was uniting to a cause larger than oneself. Like Sam and some of the old-time Wobblian socialist speakers I had heard. He came to the center of the room after the speech where an informal cue waited to shake his hand. And that is how we met, 10 seconds at best. There was nothing special to note about the encounter, and I would have forgotten it, except that the hand I shook that day was the hand of Martin Luther King. What I gave a damn about was not shaking his hand, but the opportunity, however brief, to stand in front of him and look him in the eye. His coloring was dark brown and not jet black like Ben's. I was surprised he was not taller than he was. He had a kind of barrel chest, strong looking, the build of a middleweight wrestler. His nose was long and delicate, the planes of his face flat, and without the fleshy appearance his cheeks took on as he aged. It was a youthful face, in my recollection markedly different than the one evident in the last photographs. When our eyes met, I saw a young man. He was, after all, only 8 years my senior. Dr. King, I enjoyed your speech, was all I could think of to say under pressure of those waiting behind me. If each of us knew then about events to come, I could have said more, that my parents and I knew a good friend of his, Bayard Rustin. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He was instrumental on the March in Washington. He was homosexual, and King dropped him because he got caught in some kind of embarrassing situation, and you know, the Southern senators were licking their chops for something like that, so he dropped him. A good friend of his, Bayard Rustin, who was instrumental in helping him formulate his philosophy of nonviolence, which he did, and who was a key figure in the March on Washington. That night I called Sam. I told him I heard King speak and shook his hand. "What do you think of him?" Sam asked. "He's an impressive fellow," I answered. Sam paused. Then I heard him harumph in that way he had when not comfortable with the conversation. "Let's see if he measures up to half the man of Ben Fletcher," he growled. That was the end of my writing about Ben, because you know I have a few chapters. So of course he did measure up, obviously so, but I mean that was his perspective, because here was a man. Peter Cole, who wrote Wobblies on the Waterfront, and he's a professor at Illinois, at Western Illinois. I said to Peter, you know, I said, look, you know, if you take away the veneer, the polyurethane, you know, and you scratch down to the men, I don't see that King was a superior man than Ben Fletcher. And in many ways, what Fletcher did was superior, considering the times and what he was up against. So, you know, Peter said, I agree with you. He says, but history doesn't work that way. History is not just. History is the remembered past. And then, who gives a shit about Wobblies, right? Old socialist who went to jail, and a poor black man. Because when I say poor black man, he worked on the waterfront. He was a laborer. So this is what it was about, you know. So anyway, I could go on and on. I know I'm over speaking, and there's so much more to it. Have you ever heard of Dorothy Day? You ever hear of it? She was nominated for sainthood. Pope, the latest Pope, I forget what, Francis, spoke about her in Congress. So my father knew her. They used to argue the point together, and he used to say to her, you know, she became she started, you know, this is an impressive woman. She was a great woman. Don't misunderstand because I make a little jabrubus remark. She founded a whole order of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Worker Movement was by her. A fantastic woman, courageous and all these things. Please don't think I denigrate her. But still, they used to argue the point. And you know, she became a Catholic later in life, around 1930. So. My father used to say he had this ironic sense of humor, and I wish I could imitate him, but I can't. He'd say, I knew Dorothy when she was a footloose bohemian girl. You know, before all this aura of sainthood was about, the way he put it, you know. He would speak at the Catholic Worker Group. She never gave up her anarchism. And she always considered herself a Catholic anarchist, which is sort of I can understand Christian anarchist. Tolstoy was a Christian anarchist. I can't understand Catholic anarchist. That means obedience to an organization. But that's what she called herself. She was always an anarchist, and she was a wobbly in many respects. She was back. She fought the church. They had a grave diggers strike, and she supported the strikers, and the hierarchy was furious at her because she supported it. So anyway, they used to speak, you know, at meetings like this, and you know, they'd come in, and there'd be a prayer to start the meeting, and my father was, you know, and they'd all say a prayer, you know, that the meeting would be over. He and Dorothy wouldn't speak. They nod at each other. And they go on. They knew each other like 50 years, you know. It was very funny, you know. Her great love, by the way, I don't know if it was sexual or just very close. I mean, I wouldn't say. But there was a man named Michael Gold, who was a writer, and he was a communist, but he wrote a tremendous book called Jews Without Money. Tremendous book about growing up poor on the Lower East Side, and he was a Jewish fellow, and they were like that. But I don't think it was sexual at that stage because she had already gone over to the church very religious. I mean, she was sincerely religious. She gave a talk at Hunter College. I write about this. When I went to Hunter, I was a student. So I hadn't seen her for many years. So there she was giving a talk. So I came in, and it was to a Catholic organization, Newman Club it was called. I don't know if you ever heard of it, Cardinal Newman. And all these, you know, women were interested in her because she was a celebrity. And she sits up front, totally unadorned, without any makeup, her hair perfect, black dress, and she proceeds to talk about sexual, what's the word? She chastised it. Look at your makeup, how you're enticing men, how you're sex is only for procreation, no birth control, you know, and she implicitly, but very plainly implied that these girls were a bunch of sluts, you know. They started to, they're very polite in those days when you had a speaker. This is back in the, in the early 50s. They started to hiss, so some of them got up and walked out, you know. She could have said any number of things that would have endeared her to the audience, you know. They came to like her, but she was an unbending woman. This is what she felt, you know. She was very, very, very religious, you know. She didn't believe in any of these modern ideas. Her daughter had 11 kids. Through. She had one daughter before, you know, she went over to become a religious Catholic. But I say all that, but not to ridicule her, because she was a tremendous woman. I mean, in her presence you felt something, you know what I'm saying? This was not a usual person. And Dorothy Day, Catholic worker. Anyway, I could go on about Spain, I could go on about Israel, I could go on about the 60s. My father was close to a group. You can imagine my father called Up Against the Wall Motherfuckers. There was a group called Up Against, you ever hear them? They were called Up. My father tried to get them money because they were all arrested and they were going to get on trial. So he brought them to the old Italian anarchists to collect money, the La Donata group. And these were the very formal old men. They were anarchists, but of a different type, you know. And they said, "What do you mean, motherfuckers? Who uses language like motherfuckers?" He says, "We revere women," which they did. There was that hypocrisy. "How can you speak of your mother like that?" And they said. Then he said, "So you want to burn down the buildings, and you also want to shoot the firemen? That too?" That's what they said to the motherfuckers. So they didn't give them any money. Anyway, but most of them, my father said that most of them were harmless men. They had this rhetoric, but they weren't capable of doing anything that they professed to do. They were all noise.
We're starting to get a little close on time.
That's enough already. Okay.
I hate to rush you, but we.
Well, rush me. I talked for 2 hours, right?
Yeah. But
no, I know you have to. I'm sorry if I talk too much and lost the thread of the whole thing. I get lost in the anecdotes, but the book is organized, so you can read it.
What do we have left for time? Is that,
about 10 minutes.
So,
Yeah.
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So you said way back in the beginning that your father stayed with the Wobblies through what you called the decline.
Right.
I mean, obviously, I think it was around 1960, it went down to like 200 members and almost ceased to exist. Was he in it then? And this is something that I'm really curious about because
he was
obviously,
in it all the way.
okay, because you know, there's this huge heyday back in the first half of the 20th century, and then you know, it almost goes out, and then we've kind of been at like 2,000-3,000 members in the 80s.
A comeback, yes.
Yeah, I mean, like a little bit, but
Yeah, I mean,
you know, nothing like it used to be. But so, what did your father say about it when it was on the decline, or like did he comment on how it was changing?
Well, it's a complex question. He thought that the Wobblies' tactics they made a lot of mistakes, but he also said that, you know, they had just tremendous repression against them. So and he said that, look, I was speaking to you about it this afternoon. I don't know if I'm answering it directly, but I'm giving you his feeling about it.